Good evening. Welcome to the Town of Islip Planning Board for Wednesday, November 8, 2023. If you are here for item number 1086 MJ Boulevard LLC, that will not be heard this evening. That has been adjourned. I remind everyone, if you are an applicant, to keep your presentations to 30 minutes or less. And if you're a member of the community who would like to speak, please fill out a yellow card. Leave it at the first table over here when you walk in. And remind you to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Would everybody please stand for the pledge?
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First item on the agenda, site plan modification, public hearing, Jim Nazaro, SP 2022-098, east side of Saxon Avenue, 480 feet south of Union Boulevard, Bay Shore, 8 and 12 Saxon Avenue. Applicant requests buffer, landscaping, parking, and dimensional relaxations in connection with an addition to an existing medical office.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the applicant, Steve Bertolino, 130 West Main Street, East Islip, New York. Mr. Chairman, just so you know what I just handed up, I spoke to Tana Gonzalez in the planning department a couple of days ago, and after that conversation, Mr. Nazaro went back to his architect and had the site plan redrawn to address some of the comments that Tana suggested to me. We did file that with the town, but I wanted to make sure the board members had the most current version in front of them before we proceeded. And then I also submitted two, we'll say photographs or copies of photographs, one of which is the view of the rear of the dumpster corral, which I know is going to be addressed this evening. And the second one is a Google Earth view from 2016, so you can see what the parcel looked like, as I referenced that in my application. So if this board would recall, back in 2015-16, Mr. Nazaro started acquiring properties up at the corner of Saxon and Union. And what we were looking to do at that time was to move the 7-Eleven, which was located mid-block on Saxon Avenue, up to the corner of Saxon and Union and put a gas station there. It was a long process to put that assemblage together, and we went through it. Finally, the 7-Eleven opened about 2 years ago. In 2022, Mr. Nazaro purchased the old 7-Eleven property, which then ran with a covenant both with the town and from the prior owner that it could never be used as a convenience store again. So what we're proposing tonight is to expand the existing Nazaro offices and medical building at 8 Saxon Avenue, which has been there since about 2006. In 2016, there was an extension put on that building to the east. And now we're looking to build a separate building combining the two parcels to the north of the existing building. The elevations, which you can see to my right, which to your left, the proposed building is going to look basically identical to the existing structure. It's going to be just an extension of what's already there. It will be a one-story, approximately 5,900 square foot building. And we're proposing to put medical offices in the facility. But I can tell you as of right now, we do not have any signed tenants. My understanding is that there might have been some conversations with the board and the planning department as to what type of medical practice would be put into the facility. And we don't have any signed tenants. Mr. Nazaro is building this on spec. He does have some relationships with some local medical providers in the community, and we're hopeful that we can get a signed tenant when the property is built. On that note, we did ask for a parking relaxation, with our parking computations being based on the most intensive permitted use. So this is a permitted retail use, it's a permitted office use, and it is a permitted medical use. The medical use requires a much more, a larger parking requirement than if we went for a regular office. So what we didn't want to do is make the application to the board and say, oh, we're going to have general offices there, put the building up, and then have to come back to the board and say, oh, by the way, can we put medical in here? So we're going for the medical up front, even though we don't have the signed tenants, so I can't tell you what type of practice would be there on that. One of the concerns that the planning department raised was the buffer. As you can see from the plan we submitted to you now, we will comply with the 25-foot buffer in full on the northerly side of the property, with the exception of the existing dumpster in the rear. With respect to the relaxation on Saxon Avenue itself, you have a required 8-foot front yard setback, and we're providing 6.2, which would match up what is already there and is approved at the 8 Saxon Avenue location. One of the photographs I handed up is showing you what the view looked like in 2016 when it was the 7-Eleven parcel. And you'll note from that photograph that there was absolutely zero front yard landscaping up to Saxon Avenue for the entire parcel. You really don't see any greenery on that site until you get to the Nazaro parcel. The parking at 7-Eleven was such a nightmare at the time that in 2006, Nazaro and 7-Eleven Corp. Entered into a cross-access agreement, allowing for parking and access, egress and egress to the both parcels. What was happening in 2016 forward is that you had kind of an angled jog in the front parking lot. And what we're looking to do is clean that all up. Mr. Nazaro has already demolished the existing 7-Eleven. We're now looking to run a straight line on the westerly side of the property on Saxon Avenue, keeping the 6.2 setback that already exists, adding front yard landscaper that never existed for the entire life. I believe it was about 50 years that 7-Eleven building was there. And if you look at that 2016 photo, you'll also notice that if you were to go further south on Saxon, the next shopping center down also appears to have that same, I'll say minor or relatively smaller front yard landscaping on that. So we're keeping in line, we're adding to the landscaping on the entire site. I know we're not allowed to count greenery with the buffer, but with the change of plan, the buffer now extends all the way to Saxon Avenue in front, so you will have a much greener look looking from Saxon. Addressing the relaxation request for the dumpster, I just had a private conversation with somebody, and I told them that on Thursday of last week, Mr. Nazaro, myself, and Greg Mogul, Mr. Nazaro's right-hand man, had a conversation about how this happened with the dumpster. So in 2016, there was an approval granted by this board to allow a relaxation of 23.3 feet in the back. And it was not supposed to be for the dumpster. It was supposed to be for a parking change. The problem that arose, or I should say the issue that happened, was that there was a plan only 2 weeks prior that the contractor was given and the contractor used to do it. Nobody caught it, and we were scrambling in my office to actually find a copy of the approved site plan and the conditions that were issued in 2016. Unfortunately, none of us had it, and we did wind up getting it from, we'll call it archives that Nazaro's staff had kept. And that's when we realized for the first time that that dumpster enclosure was not put in conformity with what was approved in 2016. It was an honest mistake. Mr. Nazaro wants me to apologize to the board for that mistake. It's not something he normally does. It was approved, I should say, it was inspected and CO'd when the extension to 8 Saxon was put on, and it's now been there for about 7.5 years. Photograph number 2 that you have shows the planting that exists behind that concrete dumpster. So we've got some enhanced planting already there. Sure, we could add a few more trees to the back of that, but in 7 years of its existence, there has not been one complaint from the apartment complex next door. Now, I could say there's not been one complaint from anyone else, but no one else is here to complain. Really, what we look at is what's existing. I'm apologizing on behalf of the applicant for it occurring. I'm asking that the board see fit to allow us to keep it, to maintain. Lastly, when it comes to the parking relaxation, we need 117 spaces. We're providing 109, which leaves us with a 6.84% relaxation request. I know this board routinely grants, and sometimes even administratively, you get a 10% relaxation. And as I said a few moments ago, we're submitting the proposal for the most intensive permitted use of medical. If we were to come in with office, we probably wouldn't need a relaxation. We believe that it's the best application so that it saves time and energy going forward. We won't have to come back and ask for the medical because we're intending on letting this as a medical property. That's all I have for the board, unless the board has any questions. Hopefully I've addressed all the concerns that were conveyed to me from Tana Gonzalez. And if anyone else has anything additional, please let me know.
Thank you. We have nobody who's signed up for a public comment on this, so why don't I go to Mr. Gonzalez, and then we'll come back for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This is a Business 1 zoned 1.7 acre property currently improved with an almost 12,000 square foot, one-story office and medical building at 12 Saxon Avenue. The original 8,000 square foot portion of the building was CO'd in 2007 with a rear 3,900 square foot addition CO'd in 2018 under site plan 2016-013. The proposal tonight is for the construction of a new one-story, 6,000 square foot medical office fronting Saxon Avenue with related site improvements. 8 Saxon also maintained the former 7-Eleven, which was CO'd in 1972, which has since been demolished in anticipation of this project. Both properties will be consolidated as part of this application. Most of the site is existing with conditions that do not meet current site plan requirements. This is a combination of pre-existing conditions and certain site items that were not built per the approved plans. The relaxations are as follows. Originally, the buffer on the north side on Saxon Avenue was proposed at 11.9 feet instead of the required 25. That has since been revised with new plans that were submitted today with a compliant 25-foot buffer on that location. The existing 15 feet that is provided for the dumpster enclosure in the rear of the property was built incorrectly and not in compliance with the prior approved site plan. It appears 2 additional parking stalls were added, which pushed the refuse enclosure closer to the property line in the residential zone. Landscaping is overall, I believe, the new number based on the new plan, just under 10% instead of the required 20, and front yard of about 2.6 instead of the required 10%. The existing medical building at 12 Saxon Avenue was granted a little over 12% overall landscaping and under 4% in the front yard. 8 Saxon Avenue maintained virtually no front yard landscaping, however, exceeded the overall. The overall reduction is approximately 4,000 square feet and is subject to a potential mitigation fee. The front yard is being boosted slightly and attempting to keep in character with the existing area in the front parking area on Saxon Avenue. There is a minor proposed jog on the curb line, which is not ideal. However, if that can be worked around, that would be fine. And now parking is 109 stalls provided where 117 are required. This relaxation is minor. Staff has no issue with that. At this time, staff defers to any comments or questions from the board.
Thank you. And thank you for the revised plan of the 25-foot buffer. That was a concern I had. I have only one issue. You probably know what it is. Something I'm consistently.
I don't want to
talking
guess in case I'm
about.
wrong. Give you another one.
What you said was exactly right when we talked about it with staff was the fact that it was a Nazaro project and usually you do everything to the letter of what's been approved. So it was sort of shocking for us to see it there. It got missed, things happen. But I'm not a fan against residential properties of putting dumpsters inside the 25-foot. Outside of that, I have no issue. If there's a way to move that in or move it somewhere else on the property, I have not one issue with the other relaxations that are sought. That's my opinion on it. Other than that, I'll defer to the rest of the board. That's my only comment. And thank you for acknowledging it and the apology and the rest, but that's
It
just
was
a precedent
truly
I
a
don't want
mistake,
to.
and I can tell you, Mr. Friedland, we did scramble in my office to figure out how it happened, and the resolution that we came up with was there was a plan that was, I guess, submitted to the board at that time, and it was only 2 weeks prior. So what happened was that was the one that was circulating. It's not what was approved by the board, and it never made it back to the contractor. That was the issue. So addressing that, I would say, again, it's been there for 7.5 years. We haven't had any complaints. I do appreciate your position. Mr. Nazaro appreciates the position. The cost involved in moving that and losing, the 2 spaces, it's a lot. It's not a $200, it's $25,000 mistake, if you will. So we're saying, look, if there were several complaints or even one complaint, we might agree with you and say, hey, let's move it. We've really had no issue. It's hidden from view. It's not a dumpster enclosure that can be seen from anyone, really. It's truly an enclosure by the building as well. So it's not visible from any street. It's not visible from the adjoining apartment complex. And I believe the nearest apartment complex unit is some 70 feet away. So, you know, you have a 25-foot buffer on our side, you have an additional 45 feet of buffer, which I know we're not allowed to use, but I'm giving that example as to why we're asking that it stay there. I do want to address Mr. Tanner's comment on that jog in the front. We're trying to keep everything aligned, if you will. The jog is less than a foot. It's about 8 inches, and it would take place in a parking spot. So you could really just take the curb line and kind of swoop it in. It wouldn't affect anything because it's at the curb line, and that would keep all the parking stalls in the straight line. We know it's not ideal, but that's what happens when you join up, you know, the existing with, you know, this new parcel that we're trying to assemble into one unit.
Thank you. Mr. Brown?
You're speaking.
Mr. Brown?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with the chairman in reference to the buffer, especially against, even though you have a 70-foot buffer to the property line or to the apartments behind you with the trash bin or enclosure being inside the buffer zone. That's my only sticking point also. I mean, if that was rectified tonight, I'd be ready to move forward with the application.
Oh, it doesn't sound like I'm getting much choice here. And you know, listen, my
You know,
client.
It's not you, your client, obviously, he does great work. It's just, it's a precedent setting for us. Again, if the standard is whether or not somebody complains, we'd be approving a lot of things, and down the road, there'd be a complaint, we'd be back here.
And I understand that. And Mr. Nazaro understands what the precedent is as well. You know, he's suggested, you know, that we push this, explain why it happened, apologize to the board up front. If the board were to approve this application in all other respects and disapprove that buffer, how could I say no?
I have no other issues outside of the, I don't know if anybody else does, or any of the comments. And maybe there's a majority without me that would support it the way it is.
So, Mr. Friedland, if I could just make one comment. So I've just been informed with Mr. Nazaro's manager. Could we make a condition that if there were a complaint in the future?
It's just a dangerous precedent, because everybody's gonna come before this board and say the same thing, and that's where the problem comes in. I mean, obviously, the code is the way it is for a reason. And if our
I
standard
understand.
becomes, unless somebody complains, then why even have these meetings? Go build what you want. If nobody complains, you're there. That's the issue. And again, it's up against residents. It's not, you know, against another non-residential use. I understand the building is further setback. I've looked at it. Kevin and I both said, Mr. Brown and I both said, your enclosure, like you said, is one of the best ones you've seen. It's completely solid, but we're just creating a precedent or allowing something to continue that's within a buffer. And that's my concern, my only concern.
That's with us 100% totally giving you the benefit of doubt that it happened by accident.
I have no other reason to believe otherwise, but
Neither do I. And that's why I said we're ready. I think we're ready to move forward with the application with that stipulation, unless there's any objections or any other questions from the.
Mr. Frugier.
Yeah, no, I would tend to agree with my board members, but if we, and I would be inclined if we can resolve this dumpster issue to support this application this evening. But as I look at the site plan, the only way to relocate the dumpster and still comply with, you know, the required buffer areas, is gonna mean he's gonna lose about 2 more parking spaces. So if we do that, we would have to add into the call that, you know, the relaxation is greater than what's the call of the meeting tonight.
And I'm okay with that. I've been there, past there plenty of times. I've never seen it overparked in that development at all. So I am certainly okay with that. I don't know.
and Mr. Ferrigiari, Mr. Gonzalez and I talked about that last week as well. And we do recognize that, you know, if the board is not going to approve that part of the application, yes, we would need an additional 2 spaces, perhaps 4. And the only reason for that is to make a small cut-in for the cars that are parked on the end to kind of jut in. We won't know that until we submit. But I do want to let you know that it may be an additional 4 spaces. But you're talking about 117 required, and we'd be providing 105 at that point. So I still think it's less than 10% and still within what the board wants. I just don't want to leave here telling the board that it's only 2, because we've had this discussion and it may wind up being 4.
Yeah, I'm taking a look at an area within your site plan that's already hashed out. It's a corner of the parking lot. And you might be able to lose 1, possibly 2 spaces and do something in that location, and then you're moving it to complete opposite side of the apartments.
And the funny thing about that is that's where the dumpster was approved back in 2016. And I just want to point out to the board that that dumpster corral will be visible from Saxon Avenue, where the existing dumpster corral is not. So whether or not we slide it over, which we don't want to do, because we actually have a pathway, a walkway that goes from the back parking lot between the buildings to the front. If we were to slide the dumpster in its present location to the south, you'd kind of be walking, public would be walking around that dumpster container to get from the rear parking lot to the front. So we believe the only other possible alternative is exactly where you're pointing out, is the hash mark. And again, then that enclosure is completely visible from Saxon Avenue, whereas now it's not. And that's kind of our argument for letting it stay where it is. But of course, if the board saw fit to grant the application, I would be most appreciative, and then we can adjust the dumpster as we need to with those possible 4 parking spaces we
And
lost.
I would agree to move it forward and lose 2 to 4 spots and increase the,
I just don't think we can move it forward or south. We'd have to move it, just because I don't think you're gonna want pedestrians kind of walking around the dumpster enclosure to get to that sidewalk that brings you from the back to the front.
And if you move it to the other location, Mr. Frugieri pointed out, you put plantings on the one side of it, so you don't see it from Saxon?
Then we lose the parking spot, right?
But you'd not lose as many parking spots.
Perhaps, and again, we won't know that, but again, if the
Right.
board saw fit to grant it, we'll have to move it over to the southeast corner.
Ms. Gonzalez.
I'm just looking at the last approved plan. It's designated as a fire zone, so the fire marshal may have, required that nothing be put there, just based on a quick look. I'm not exactly sure, but
I think the solution, and I'm not the designer, architect, I think the solution might be in the northeast corner instead of straight in the middle. Whether or not that presents a problem for the refuse company, we can definitely work that out. Again, if we work out the parking and the other approvals, we'll deal with it.
I think we're all in agreement. And Tanya, you can work out the CNRs, all subject to. Are there any further questions from the board? Anything further from the applicant?
Nothing, thank you.
Is there a motion? Mr. Frugieri?
I'll make a motion that we close this public hearing and grant this application subject to planning staff and the applicant agreeing on appropriate covenants and restrictions. And then also changing the call of the meeting for the parking relaxation to add to the 4 parking stalls as needed to relocate the dumpster to an appropriate location.
Motion by Mr. Frugieri to close the public hearing and grant the application, subject to CNRs being agreed to between the applicant and the planning staff, as well as changing the call to reflect that the parking relaxation may need an additional 2 to 4 parking spaces. Is there a second to that? Mr. Brown, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, the application is granted. Thank you.
Chairman, members, thank you. Good evening, happy holidays.
Item 2, site plan modification, public hearing, Christopher Goodman, Goodman Physical Therapy, PC, SP 2023-007, southeast corner of Higbee Lane and Oakwood Avenue, West Islip, 255 Higbee Lane. Applicant requests parking, buffer, dimensional, and other site plan modifications in connection with the change of use from a funeral home to a physical therapy office. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Board. David Gilmartin Jr., Greenberg Traurig, 900 Stewart Avenue, Garden City, New York. This parcel is located at 255 Higbee Lane in West Islip. It's on the southeast corner of Higbee and Oakwood. There's a split zone property between the Business 1 and the Residential B, with 90% of the lot in the Business 1 and 10% in the residential. The applicant's requesting certain site plan relaxations to allow Mr. Goodman to relocate an existing physical therapy office, which would replace a funeral parlor. Obviously, the physical therapy office is a more consistent, less intense use than a funeral parlor. To achieve the relocation, the applicant is required to upgrade the existing conditions on site. And I'd ask our architect, Michael Mordillo of Ensign Designs, to come up and go through the plan with you. After Mr. Mordillo finishes, Mr. Goodman would like to address the proposed limitation of 3 practitioners on site. And since an existing business, Mr. Goodman has a pretty good idea of the requirements parking wise and people on site, and when those 4 practitioners would be there. And I'd finally note that we have 2 letters in support from our neighbors, and most notably our neighbor to the east, who's the most impacted at 314 Oakwood, and her name is Anne-Marie Taldone. And I'd ask Mr. Mordillo to come up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, Michael Morbillo, architect, Inspire Design Group. My office is located at 4964 Express Drive South, Ronkonkoma, New York. So briefly, I'd like just to touch base on some of the improvements that we're making to the site as part of this change of use application. Um, Specifically, the site presently does not have any stormwater structures in it. There's no storm pools or catch basins on site. So if you've see the aerial views, there's the existing site actually merges with Oakwood Avenue, and it's one continuous paved area. Probably for the last 60 years since the building was constructed, all of the drainage from that parking area has gone out into the drainage structures on Oakwood Avenue. So upon review with engineering staff, we have basically, we are now containing all stormwater from roof runoff and from paving is being contained on site with brand new drainage structures. We are also proposing on-site curbing and new landscaping. We're also, where one does not exist, we are proposing sidewalk and curbing and new drainage inlets along Oakwood Avenue. There are presently two, what I'll call access points in between the current parking striping on site, and we are creating two new aprons into the site. We're providing street trees along Oakwood Avenue. Higby Lane presently has recently been improved by County Highway with sidewalk and landscaping and street tree, ornamental street tree improvements. And we're carrying that along Oakwood Avenue. We're having overhead electric line is now being placed underground with an underground service. We are also adding landscaping in the form of evergreen species trees on the eastern property line, which is up against the residential property. Presently, there is a 0-foot setback. Paving it goes all the way up to the property line, so we're cutting that back up to a new curb line, which is approximately 5 feet off the property line, and we're providing landscaping in that area, along with other parking, shielding, landscaping, low landscaping on the north side of the property along Oakwood Avenue. We've also closed in a second driveway access off of Higby Lane, and in that area are providing additional landscaping to bring us in conformance with the landscaping requirements. There's also, I know, much discussion on the last application. For the last 60 years, there's been a dumpster enclosure, which was 0 feet off of the property line in the corner. And we've moved that as far forward as we can, and we'll be providing landscaping around that enclosure, the new enclosure. And let me see if there's anything else. I think that covers most of it. Part of the relaxation that we are seeking relative to the parking is we are providing several handicap parking spaces, which requires several loading spaces or loading areas. So that's impacted our parking, in meeting our parking requirements. As I'm sure will be discussed or was just previously mentioned, as part of the parking relaxation request, we are looking at something that we believe is much less intense. We're being we're providing for medical usage for the parking, and as people know, with physical therapists, they're not the typical type of medical operation where we have many exam rooms, waiting rooms, and people waiting in lobbies, and we kind of have very high intensive usage. Physical therapists tend to have a very spread out operation on the inside where with equipment and other things. And The applicant and council will discuss that a little bit further as far as how the operation works. But we have what we feel is more than adequate parking based upon the applicant's current operation within the town of Babylon. So I think I've covered that. I can come back up for questions unless there's some immediate questions and allow Mr. Gilmartin to complete the presentation.
Anything further from the applicant?
Mr. Goodman, just like to address the practitioner level and impact.
Good evening, Chairman and board members. Thank you for having me. We received a letter stating that we can have up to 3 practitioners on site. I was wondering if I could just increase one more to 4 for my practice. If we did, that still would not impact too much on the parking. We would still need about peak time would probably be about between 18 and 20 spaces that we would require.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything further?
I just note that as part of the parking analysis, that many of the people that are brought there, I think up to about 25% are dropped off and don't require a parking space. I think we'd fit within that 24 pretty nicely. But other than that, we can answer any questions.
Thank you. We go to public hearing, then staff report.
Okay, John Davis.
Good evening, John Davis, on behalf of the West Islip Association, PO Box 84, West Islip, New York. As you've heard tonight, there are a few issues with this property, but many of the properties, the commercial properties in that area are older buildings, and we believe that many of them do not meet today's requirements for buffer zones and setbacks, et cetera. So whenever we see something like this coming along that appears to be an improvement, we'd like to support it. We feel that the site plan improvements discussed tonight by the applicant will benefit the area, and it will improve the overall appearance of the property in addition to resolving the drainage issues. Also, we would agree with the applicant that parking was a problem on a number of occasions when it was a funeral home for many years, particularly if it was a wake for a well-known person. Parking had to be scattered all over the neighborhood there, quite literally. I think that problem will not exist with the physical therapy office. So overall, we feel that the proposal is an improvement for the area. It's much less intensive use than in the recent past. So we do support this application. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the only card I have. I'm going to turn to Mr. Gonzalez for a staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a Business 1 Zone half-acre property, currently improved with a 6,400 square foot, 2-story building. Originally CO'd as a machine shop in 1946, bank and office building in 56, and then a funeral home in 1978. It is currently vacant. The proposal before the board tonight is to change that to a physical therapy office. The proposed use is being relocated from the town of Babylon as a currently operating business with an existing track record. There is no expansion of the building proposed, only site improvements to come closer to code conformity. As seen on the aerials and the plans before you, much of the site has existed in a substandard condition from a zoning perspective for many years. The relaxations are parking, 24 stalls provided where 43 are required. In terms of the prior use of the funeral home to the new physical therapy office, it is an intensification in terms of the parking requirement. However, the new use is generally less of an impact on the surrounding area. Funeral homes tend to draw large amounts of people at once, typically causing overflow parking on the side streets and into the neighborhood. For the applicant, the physical therapy office will operate with 4 practitioners, of a total of 13 employees. That's 6 full-time, approximately 7 part-time. During the day, the employees on site range from 2 in the morning, about 6 or 7 during the midday, and 4 at night. Hours are approximately Monday through Thursday, 7 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. Friday is about 7 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. and Saturday, 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. with the office closed on Sundays. Typically, 4 to 6 patients are seen per hour, with the applicant stating the maximum parking demand during peak hours will be approximately 17 stalls, possibly 20 with the fourth practitioner. Actual demand may be less as many patients utilize pickup and drop off from family members, ride sharing options, or public transportation. There are also 4 on-street parking stalls on Higby Lane in front of the property for public use. Landscaping overall and front yard requirements are met, other than the minimum 8 feet along the Oakwood Avenue street frontage, which is actually increasing from the existing condition. There's a minor setback relief for the parking stalls there, but that is also being increased from the existing condition. The buffer, the current site provides very minimal buffer, only a few feet along the eastern property line adjacent to that residential property. There's no formal curb, only curb stops and a subpar area of ground cover where technically 25 feet of buffer is required. This condition has essentially existed for decades. The applicant is proposing little under 4 feet at the narrowest point with a single row of yew hedge and emerald green arborvitae, 12 to 15 feet high, 7 feet on center. And although not the full buffer planting treatment, it is restricted based on the minimal planting space, and it is an upgrade for the site. The current plan also proposes a 6-foot-high chain link fence tapering to 4 feet within 15 feet of the right-of-way, which is a zoning requirement. The standard stockade attachment for the buffer fence is not included. However, the adjacent neighbor also has a 6-foot-high PVC fence, so if the board feels the stockade portion is not necessary, that could be waived. The existing refuse enclosure in the southeast corner of the property has no current setback. It is being shifted approximately 7.5 feet to the pad and 11 feet to the enclosure. So although the full buffer requirement is not being met, it is being improved, and losing those 9 parking stalls could create a possible overflow issue to the surrounding area. The applicant has submitted 2 letters of support, one from 400 Oakwood, which is further to the east, and one from the adjacent neighbor to the east at 314 Oakwood. So overall, the site is being improved and brought closer to conformity. The existing conditions are substandard, and the proposed condition, although still substandard, is an improvement. Conditions have been prepared, should the board make a motion tonight, and all comments and concerns have been addressed.
Thank you. Questions?
Yeah.
Mr. Brown, then Mr. Ferrari.
Well, first of all, Tana, if we took away the stockade fence because there's a PVC along the property line, would they be assuming some responsibility for it would be the neighbor's fence in case it's damaged and everything from their side?
Damage to the PVC fence that the neighbor owns?
Right, because it's not going to be covered with the stockade now. It would be open, which I think would be a better look.
Yeah.
Be a better application, but there should be some responsibility if it gets damaged from people from their side.
Yeah, I mean, the only other option would be the existing chain link fence further in the back of the property. I believe, and the applicants can speak to this, it has a green privacy slat on the 6-foot portion. The existing 4-foot taper does not have that, so if the board feels they need to add that to the 4-foot portion, they could do that instead of doing the stockade.
Yeah, the stockade, it's just not a nice look several years down the
Yeah.
road. The other thing is, the only condition I'd like to see is if there's any change of use whatsoever, that it doesn't have to come back for a public forum, but to come back to the board.
Yeah, we could add that.
And that's the only comments I have.
Mr. Ferrari.
I just have one question for the applicant. Higby Lane is the closest thing West Islip has to a main street. So are you proposing any facade improvements or changes to the facade? Not that the existing.
There's an awning that is, that's on Higby, which was part of the funeral home, which was a non-conforming, and it kind of projects out from the building. I can't say it's the most architecturally pleasing. It is being removed.
Okay.
So, but if the building is actually highly landscaped on Higby, and but we're not proposing any facade changes on the building at this
Bottom
time.
line, the nature and character of that building is remaining as is.
Correct.
It's not going to be
Yes.
changed to some modern structure or something
No,
that doesn't
no.
fit with the character of West Islip.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Thank you. That's my only question.
I'll just wanted to address the dumpster issue and just to differentiate from the previous applications, the fact that it's currently on the property line and you're actually moving it about 11 feet in from the property line.
Yes.
Additionally, you're not seeking to expand the size of the building, so you're actually improving it. You're not here to say we want more relaxation, so I'd be in full support of it the way it is, where it is, and, thank you for moving it in. In terms of the fencing, I'm okay with it, the way it is. If the rest of the board is, I would just say that if we asked you to change it, then may encroach a little bit more in terms of the landscaping you're gonna try and squeeze in there, so knowing that you're gonna put that landscaping in. But for
Absolutely.
us to leave it the way it is, I think is certainly differentiates it from anybody else coming in to ask for the same thing. So I would be in support of the application. Any further questions? Mr. Frugieri?
I'll make a motion that we close this public hearing and grant this application, subject to the applicant and planning staff agreeing on covenants and restrictions.
Motion by Mr. Frugieri to close the public hearing, grant the application, subject to the applicant and the planning staff agreeing to covenants and restrictions. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Moriarty. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposition, abstentions, the application is granted. Thank you. Item 3 on the agenda, planning board application, public hearing, Jose Valverde, PB 2023-030, east side of Main Street, approximately 100 feet south of Railroad Avenue, Holbrook, 1057 Patchogue Holbrook Road. Applicant requests a planning board special permit for a minor restaurant in the Business 1 District pursuant to 68-272.1A. Site plan modifications may also be requested as part of the application. Good evening.
Good evening, everybody. Members of the board, my name is Pablo Rodriguez. I am the president of Cavalry Engineering PC, the location in 70 East Main Street in Patchogue. I am here representing the future tenant, Jose Valverde, in this minor restaurant special permit application. The property is located at 1081 Main Street in Holbrook. It is a plus minus 17,000 square foot single-story commercial building, mainly retail and business. The site is about 2.8 acres, and I believe it was built in mid-1980s. We are proposing this interior alteration from an existing business use to it's not a restaurant, it is a juice bar. According to the Town of Islip code, it is considered a minor restaurant. That's why we are here tonight. We have submitted an application to the building department, and they have requested to come in front of the board to request a special permit. The proposed tenant space is going to be a juice bar, nutrition place juice bar. There's already existing one in Patchogue, in the village of Patchogue, which we opened 4 years ago. So right now the business is expanding to a second location in the Holbrook area. We are proposing only interior modifications because it is a multi-tenant building. There's about 13 tenant spaces. Some of them include the bar, Chinese takeout, smoke, barbershop, nail salon, a UPS store. So it's mainly the same character of throughout all these spaces. We believe that we are certain that there's no impact to site related, including parking or anything on the existing property.
Thank you. We'll go to staff report. We'll come back for questions. Does that work? Yeah. Ms. Wozniak? There's nobody here who wishes to be heard on this application, so we'll go right to the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The property is located on the east side of Main Street, approximately 100 feet south of Railroad Avenue, and it's improved with a one-story multi-tenant commercial building. Tonight, the applicant's requesting a special permit to convert one of the tenant spaces into a juice bar with 6 seats. The square footage of the unit is 1,264 square feet, and it's located on the northern portion of the building. The applicant will also require a parking relaxation. However, it only increases the required parking from the previous use by 4 stalls. The site itself is in good condition. However, there is some unpermitted storage in the rear and some unpermitted signage on the property. Planning recommends the board grant the application subject to the attached conditions which require the applicant to remove that unpermitted storage and clean up the signage.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? The applicant's okay with the covenants and restrictions that Ms. Wozniak brought up?
Yes, we are. We're going to talk to the property owner. Obviously, he was not. We were not informed about this storage, and definitely, I think that cleaning of the signage is not going to be an issue. But we do thank you.
Okay, but if we grant the approval tonight, it'll be subject to that.
Yes.
Is there a motion? Mr. Matamore? Put the mic on, just for those watching.
Thanks. I move to close the public hearing and grant the application subject to the covenants and restrictions as being worked out between the applicant and staff.
Motion by Mr. Matamore to close public hearing, and grant the application subject to the CNRs being agreed to between the applicant and the staff. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Cruz. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, the application is granted. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Item 4 on the agenda, planning board application, public hearing, SAS Gourmet Corp., care of Stephen Scalise, PB 2023-033, south side of West Main Street, State Route 27A, 31.40 feet west of South Park Avenue, Bay Shore, 56A and 60 West Main Street. Applicant requests planning board special permit for a restaurant in the business district pursuant to 68-257.1I. Site plan modifications are also requested as part of the application. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Nicholas Pfluger of Bowler Pfluger Architects at 85 East Main Street, Bay Shore, New York, 11706. I'm the architect on the project here on behalf of the SAS Gourmet Corporation, also known as Tallulah's Restaurant. Tallulah's is looking to relocate from their current establishment on 4th Avenue in Bay Shore to the subject location at 56 West Main Street, also in Bay Shore. The building is a two-story masonry structure located in the BD zone and is approximately 100 years old. The second floor currently houses 5 apartments and shall remain intact and is not part of this application. The first floor has been vacant for some time, but it was last CO'd, as far as we can tell, as a beauty school and a doctor's office. The restaurant will have 80 interior seats and 20 seasonal outdoor seats at the rear of the building. The existing building takes up most of the site and creates a courtyard area in the rear of the building with the veterinary building on the corner of West Main and South Park Avenue. This application also incorporates the small one-story building to the west known as 60 West Main Street that will be used as part of the dining room seating for the restaurant. We're not proposing any renovations to the existing facade of 56 West Main, as there already was a facade renovation in 2021. However, we are proposing to renovate the 60 West Main Street facade, consisting of closing up the existing door and providing a new window and providing a brick facade to match the 56 West Main facade. Additionally, there's a walk-in cooler and freezer proposed that will serve the kitchen at 56 West Main Street, but is located on the 60 West Main Street property. It should be noted that the same owner owns the veterinary building on the corner, the 2 subject buildings, and the building just to the west before the park, which would be the numbers 50, 56, 16, 62 West Main Street, just so the board is aware. The parking calculation requires 61 stalls for the entire building with an additional 10 stalls for the outdoor seating. Inherently, the site cannot support any parking due to its existing configuration. I do have Kean Cody from R&M Engineering here to speak about the parking study if the board has any questions for him. In closing, we believe that having Tallulah's right on Main Street will be a great addition to the atmosphere of the downtown Bay Shore area. And we are in receipt of the planning board conditions, and the applicant agrees all of the conditions. And with that, I can take any questions from the board.
Thank you. We have nobody here who wishes to be heard on the application, so I'm going to go to Ms. Wozniak for a staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The property is located on the south side of Main Street, approximately 30 feet west of South Park Avenue in downtown Bay Shore. And it's improved with a 2-story commercial building with vacant space on the first floor and apartments on the second floor. Tonight, the applicant is looking to convert the first floor space into a 5,100 square foot restaurant with 80 seats. The applicant also proposing to install a walk-in freezer and patio area in the rear of the building, which will have an additional 20 seats. The application will require a parking relaxation and a landscaping relaxation to formalize existing conditions. The applicant did provide a draft parking study that states parking in the immediate area does not show full occupancy during peak hours. So based on this, planning recommends the board grant the application subject to the attached conditions.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Anything further from the applicant? Oh, is there a motion? Mr. Moriarty?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I'd make a motion to close the public hearing, grant the application subject to the attached conditions.
Motion by Mr. Moriarty to close the public hearing, grant the application, subject to the covenants and restrictions. It's second by Mr. Brown. All in favor? Opposed, abstentions, the application is granted. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Planning board application, public hearing, BDG Sunvet LLC, PB 2023-034, northeast corner of Sunrise Highway, Service Road, State Route 27, and Broadway Avenue, Holbrook, 5801 Sunrise Highway. Applicant requests an increase of approximately 12,000 square feet in gross floor area pursuant to TC 5417, covenant number 11. A landscaping relaxation is requested as part of the application.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Brian Kennedy, partner with Fortelli Deegan Toronto, offices at 333 Earl Ovington Boulevard, Uniondale, New York, for the applicant. In just a moment, I'll be handing up some revised renderings for the board's review, along with copies of the site plan, as well as boards of all of the exhibits for your review. Now, the applicant is before this board this evening seeking a minor modification to the site plan this board approved almost exactly a year ago. I'll provide a brief history of this application for the board, then you'll hear testimony from Chris Robinson, Wayne Muller of R&M Engineering, and Nick Gargosi of SBLM Architecture. The applicant appeared before this board on November 9th of 2022, seeking relief to revitalize the dilapidated, nearly vacant Sunvet Mall. The existing building at the site is approximately 280,000 square feet. The application approval called for a drastic reduction in the size of this sprawling vacant mall. Ultimately, this board granted a recommendation for a change of zone, modification of the prior covenants and restrictions, a special permit.
Kennedy, I'm going to stop you for 1 second.
Sure.
I think we're generally in agreement. I think there's only one issue that maybe you've discussed with Mr. Colgan that maybe you can address for me, which really gets to the fact of, yes, keep the 12,000 square feet. We're okay with that.
Correct.
But in terms of either land banking stalls or possibly a mitigation fee in terms of what you're losing. So if
That
you
is
deal
true.
with that issue, that's probably the one issue that's some of us has questions on. Everything else beyond that, you're certainly welcome to make the presentation.
I am happy
don't
to
think
move
there are
this along. I know we all have a long evening ahead of us.
Get to the point on which.
The one note I will give you though, Mr. Chairman, on that 12,000 square foot issue, the 12,000 square feet added to this building, the vast majority of that are in canopy space, not leasable space. The only increase in leasable space is approximately 1,500 square feet. Now, as you mentioned, Mr. Colgan and Ms. O'Connell and I discussed the possibility of land banking stalls at the site at the request of the planning board. Unfortunately, the applicant has entered into leases with Whole Foods, Citibank, and Wells Fargo. Those leases require precisely the number that we are providing at the site. If we are required to lose any of those stalls, we will lose a tenant at the site. Now, we can offer to increase greenery in the form of planters throughout the site. We can add street trees along any of the buffers if need be. I know the proposed plan that Mr. Robinson has prepared calls for the addition of 2 street trees along each of the existing trees in Sunrise Highway.
So we want to get this approved tonight for you.
That is correct. We want that as well.
The street trees and the rest, there's something that's being worked on internally in planning. I don't think we'd be able to approve that tonight based on that. So I think there are 2 options to get this to go forward tonight.
Okay.
As I see it, which is land banking or mitigation. If there's a way to work on land banking or subject to, and if you can't get an agreement from your tenant, you can come back, but.
Well, so then I guess I would ask the board what the details of that mitigation would be, because we're not here to modify the covenants and restrictions. If there is a set fee, that is something I could discuss with my client.
So I have to get that from Mr. Colgan, so I don't know.
That's fine. Mr. Chairman, is there somewhere in the code that sets forth a standard landscaping mitigation fee aside from what I have dealt with personally in the Central ISA Plan Development District?
Yeah, I'm going to let Mr. Colgan answer that.
Yeah, there's a landscaping mitigation fee set forth in the land development regulations. In addition, it's on the planning department fee schedule. So currently it's $5 a square foot.
So that is a standard fee set forth in the code that is not project specific, not project specific. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Is that a number you're okay with?
Let's say yes.
Mr. Ferrugieri, we are short on the front yard landscaping, but what is proposed in this plan is an increase from the plan that was previously brought before this board. Now, the rough calculation that Mr. Robinson is advising would be approximately 5,000 square feet times $5.
I estimate a little more than that, and again, subject to engineering's review, I estimate a little closer to 30,000, but that would be, I think, on the high end.
My client has advised me that if we are in that range, that is acceptable.
Want to go to a staff report and come back with any other questions and go from there?
I would love to.
Thank you. Mr. Colgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. As stated by the applicant, this was the subject of a change of zone earlier this year. Now the applicant is coming back to modify the site plan, which they're authorized to do in conjunction with the original set of covenants and restrictions to expand it by 11,000 square feet or 12,000 square feet. A traffic study was submitted and reviewed by the town's traffic consultant, who stated from a traffic standpoint, their visions don't really have any additional impact, or I should say significant impact. He also indicated that the parking estimates for this facility would be lower than 620 spots, which would support land banking a fair number of spots to achieve additional landscaping. That being said, that did some very rough calculations here. I do believe it would be in the ballpark of 30,000, give or take. Again, subject to engineering's review. I think a cursory review identified maybe some landscaping wasn't either viable or didn't count. So again, that could all be worked out in site plan review if that's amenable to the board and the applicant. And if that's acceptable, we have no objection to the proposed changes.
Any questions from the board? The applicant want anything further?
Nope.
Who wants to make that motion? Mr. Brown.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to make a motion to close the public hearing and to grant the application subject to the CNRs and the mitigation fee in reference to land banking the stalls.
Motion by Mr. Brown to close the public hearing and grant the application subject to the CNRs with the addition of the mitigation fee, which we estimate in the ballpark of between 25 and 29,000, we think. Second by Mr. Ruggiero, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, the application is granted. Good luck. Look forward to seeing the project.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
Road opening bond release, Wood Hill Lane, Sayville, RO 1997-2495, north side of Montauk Highway, State Route 27A, 550 feet west of Astor Drive, Sayville, 24 Woodhall Lane. Applicant requested bond release in connection with 1997 road opening application for Woodhall Lane, Sayville. Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This application is the final cash bond release of a previously completed road opening that started in 1992. The cash bond has been on file since 1994. A verbal request for release was received in 2008. However, it was denied as the road had not weathered one winter and the required rights of access agreement was not submitted. The engineering division reached out to the applicant in 2010 through a letter stating all work had been completed and to submit the access agreement. The applicant has finally recorded that agreement. All improvements have received final sign off and the bond may be released. So based on that, staff recommends the board release the cash bond in the amount of $6,750.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Gonzalez? Is there a motion, Mr. Brown?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to make a motion that we grant the application as read by Mr. Gonzalez.
Motion by Mr. Brown to grant the application as read by Ms. Gonzalez. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Matamore. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? The application is granted. Next item on the agenda, Planning Board application decision item, Menino Brothers, 1575 Realty Corp. PB 2022-025, north side of Montauk Highway, State Route 27A, approximately 100 feet east of Forbes Street, Oakdale, 1575 Montauk Highway. Applicant requests a modification of Planning Board special permit conditions associated PB 2016-028 in order to expand an existing restaurant. Site plan modifications may also be requested as part of the application. Do we have an applicant? Anybody here from Menino Brothers? I think we had this problem last time. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn this application? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Who's this guy?
Well, we'll hold it to the end of the meeting, and if not, we'll adjourn it at the end of the meeting. So we're going to skip to item number 8 on the agenda, which is Planning Board application decision item, Fifth XNY LLC, PB 2023-003, west side of Fifth Avenue, County Route 13, approximately 500 feet south of Macadam Street, Bay Shore, 1612 Fifth Avenue. Applicant requests 2 Planning Board special permits for the outside overnight parking of tractor trailers and unattached box trailers pursuant to 68-340.1 C and P. Site plan modification also requested as part of this application. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Anthony Guardino, partner with the law firm of Farrell Fritz, out of New York, representing the applicant Fifth XNY LLC, which is the owner of the subject property, which is in Bay Shore. I am joined tonight by Chris Robinson and Wayne Muller, who are both professional engineers with R&M Engineering. Just some very, very brief history. You will recall that this application was on before the board for a hearing in August 16th to be exact, and the board closed the hearing and reserved decision that evening. Following that hearing, we received a number of comments from staff, and I believe that were filtered through the planning board or from the planning board, all of which were addressed by the applicant. And they were to increase the buffer on the west property line from 60 feet to 74 feet, to reduce the drive aisle on the west side of the building from 40 feet to 26 feet, and limiting that drive aisle to fire access only. Add evergreen plants along the east property line for the screening of overnight parking. Revise the site plan to comply with the front yard landscaping requirements and to reduce the number of parking spaces on the site, the number of paved parking spaces that would now need an 8.3% parking relaxation. There was a proposal for a sound attenuating fence / wall on the west and south of the property, comprised of a 6-foot tall wood fence and a 6-foot tall chain link fence. And then between the two fences, there would be sound attenuating mats installed. This is in addition to a 16-foot sound wall, kind of like a wing wall that is adjacent to the loading docks. So the attenuation provided by the fence I just described is actually like attenuation from an attenuation structure. It would include, this proposal includes solar panels on the roof of the building and EV charging stations, all as were required or requested. I received the proposed conditions from the planning department late last week. I discussed them with my client. They found them to be acceptable, except, so there was one condition in there which vests the engineering division with unfettered discretion to determine the height, length, and materials of the sound attenuation wall / fence. And that's a big problem. This is not like where we're going to leave to the engineering department the size of the bushes or the species of the bushes. As you know, there are different fences and walls that can be used for sound attenuation purposes. Some are modest in their costs, some are prohibitively expensive. but all provide a level of sound attenuation. In this case, you have to remember this wall is going to be 1,500 feet. It's a third of a mile. It's a long, long wall. So depending on how it needs to be constructed, we could be talking, millions of dollars here. So, we just can't, and I've recommended to my client that, we just can't wait till the 11th hour, go through all this process. Been working on this for about 2 years, get to engineering, and then engineering decide, hey, we need a wall like that's on the side of the expressway that's, designed by a sound engineer for this third of a mile. It's just, it can break the project. So I'm going to ask Chris Robinson to come up now, and he's going to explain that he worked on projects where this same type of sound attenuation fence/wall that I just described was proposed and accepted by this board. And in fact, it was just a single fence with the mats. This would be a double fence with the mat in the middle. So, Chris is going to explain that this type of sound attenuation, fence/wall will be effective on the site under the particular circumstances, which are a little bit unique. So, Chris, you want to address those, please? Thank you.
She's handing the rendering and the cross section.
All ready to go?
Yeah. Hey, good evening, Chris Robinson, R&M Engineering, 50 Elm Street, Huntington, New York. As Mr. Guardino mentioned, this board had approved a very similar fence at 158 Candlewood Lane, probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago, when we were in to modify the covenants to allow the 24 operation of that warehouse building. What we're talking about is a sound attenuating mat that gets hung onto the chain link fence. I have a picture of it, which they'll hand around. It shows you it's a solid mat that gets put on. They're very popular right now and being put up on a lot of the pickleball courts in a green color. So what we're looking to do is to put these mats on the chain link fence and to mount a stockade fence on the outside of it so it's sandwiched in between. But even while we're talking about that, I'd like to draw your attention to the cross section we drew in the back. Because the loading in this particular project faces both to the north and the south. The nearest truck that gets loaded is over 271 feet from the nearest residence to the west. Along the truck dock on either side of the building, we have a 16-foot high sound wall. That's a masonry wall that extends off the building the length of all the trucks. So for each end of the building is a full 16-foot high masonry wall that hides the truck docks from the neighbors to the west. Beyond that, we have landscaping. We've agreed in the conditions that the drive aisle that runs along the west side of the building would be reduced to 26 feet and be an emergency access drive only. On the west side of that drive is where we're proposing to do the 6-foot sound attenuated fence. And from there to the property line is another 74 feet of an existing vegetated forest where the grade drops down about 20 feet from the drive down to the property line. And the nearest house is another 115 feet west of that. So we have a significant amount of buffer along the west side of this building. And I'll remind the board that the west side of this building has no access into the building whatsoever other than some fire egress doors. So that's a 400 and something foot solid wall with absolutely zero activity. And to put a 16-foot sound wall to buffer the concrete wall with no activity seems to be 100 feet. My client's willing to spend several $100,000 to put in a 1,500 foot long chain link fence, sound attenuating mats with the solid wood fence next to it. We just figured we really want to try to lock this in and not leave it as an open-ended condition.
Thank you. We're going to certainly have questions for you
Certainly.
as we go through everything.
Okay, absolutely.
Is there anything further in your presentation?
No, that's it. Well, I'm really here to answer any questions and discuss this matter. And if you want to take a.
Why don't we go to the staff report, then we'll come back and go through all the questions. Ms. Wozniak?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since the public hearing, the applicant did revise the site plan in order to address comments heard by the board. That includes limiting the drive aisle to the west of the building to fire access only to reduce truck movements adjacent to the houses. The applicant did provide a sound fence adjacent to the residences as well. However, it's noted to be a 6-foot chain link fence with sound attenuating material. Planning would recommend the applicant install a standard sound wall with the height to be determined by the engineering division during site plan review, as was done for other warehouses. Based on this, planning recommends the board grant the application, subject to the attached conditions. And planning would also like to remind the board to declare lead agency as this is a type 1 action.
All right, so let's talk about, did we really ask for a 16-foot sound wall?
Yeah, so I reached out to the engineering division today to ask them, if it was something that they could determine at this time, what type of sound wall that they would recommend. And they said it's really highly dependent on the site conditions and that they really have to go through site plan review in order for them to provide that recommendation. So I couldn't get an answer today, but they did provide me with another warehouse located on Betts Highway. I think it was similar in size, maybe a little bit smaller with a little bit less loading docks. And that was for a 16-foot sound wall. And I wasn't able to provide him the specs, but their engineering company that provided their site plan did that site plan. So I would only assume that something similar would be proposed here, but.
Can I ask Kelly a question?
Mr. Brown and Mr. Fajari.
Kelly, did engineering see what was proposed by these gentlemen as far as the sound wall?
I sent them the site plan. I did not send them that picture.
Okay.
My question is similar to Mr. Brown's, because the material that the applicant just provided us gives us the specs for the walls, and it's an additional loss of 28 dBs. So we should determine if that's something that's acceptable by engineering. The other thing that I would ask us all to consider is that this site was the former Hubbard Sand and Gravel. This was a sand mining operation, which I'm sure had a high noise level to begin with, and that the proposed use is going to be much quieter than what was existing there. So I think engineering should take that into consideration as well.
So I'm told there's precedent for using this type of fence before. Whether or not it should be 6 feet or 8 feet is a question. But I would be okay with approving it, whether it be 6 feet or 8 feet, but basically subject to engineering reviewing it and saying that it works and meets the standard that's needed. I mean, if they have not looked at this yet, I don't know if they've seen this yet, but if there are comments back or it will not serve its purpose, then obviously I'm going against what they're saying. If they've already reviewed it and said we approve this as an alternative, but we want 8 feet or 6 feet, then I'm certainly fine with it going forward instead of the condition of them determining what a wall's got to be like or what material goes into a wall. I understand your point on that. And I agree with you on that. I just don't know if this has been reviewed yet by anybody in engineering. That's my only question. If engineering is okay with your submission, I'm okay with it.
Okay, but when would we find that out?
Well, they can review it. I mean, it's been submitted today, so they can review it, right? Has it been
Well,
submitted?
as long as it's not at the end of the site plan process. I don't want to wait 5 months to find out, when we're all through it, that they say, oh, by the way, what you're proposing doesn't work. I think the concern is.
I agree with you on that 100%. I was Ms. Wozniak. I mean, if this is submitted for engineering to review this, is there any reason they can't review it and comment?
I would suggest that engineering review it and then put engineering's approval of this plan into the conditions that are signed. This way it's carved in stone and everyone knows the rules from the beginning of the game.
Yeah, and that was because this was only brought up today, so engineering didn't have time to review it. So I think that's kind of why it's a question. But I did tell Anthony if engineering's okay with it, planning's also okay with it. But
And so is the board.
unfortunately, I just don't think that can be done tonight.
No, it's not going to be done tonight.
Yeah.
Okay, it sounds like we have to
It's
wait.
not going to be
That's
at
what I was
the
gonna
end of the
say.
process. It's going to be, they just haven't had it to review yet because it only got submitted today.
So they-
If they don't approve it, then you have to come back before the board. The approval is going to be conditioned upon this being approved, obviously. If it's not approved, then you come back
Understood.
before.
That's fine. And, whether it's 6 feet or 8 feet, that's not the issue.
Right.
But 16 feet is a different
In
story.
principle, we all agree as long as engineering is okay with it, that it'll serve the purpose it's intended to serve. which
So
I'm
would
not-
we leave with a conditional approval?
I think we should do a conditional approval, and if
Okay.
the conditions aren't met, you come back before.
We have to come back. Okay.
Are
That's
there
fair. Thank
further
you.
questions from the board? Anything further from the applicant?
That's fine.
Is there a motion? Mr. Brown.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to make a motion to grant the application subject to the engineering approval of the sound continuation wall and being worked out with the client as far as the 6 foot or 8 foot, whatever it would be.
Thank you. So we're going to grant the application subject to the CNRs, the addition of the condition that sound attenuation fencing, is it called, or is it a wall?
Kind of like a fence and a wall, because it's really a.
Sound
it's a-
attenuation item that was submitted this evening,
Multiple
being
fences.
reviewed by the engineering staff and their approval.
Fine, that's great. Thank you so much.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, is there a second by Mr. Frugieri? All in favor? Opposed, abstentions, the application is granted.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks, Kelly.
Item 9, Planning Board Application Decision Item, EB at Vets Highway LLC, EB at Vets Highway 2 LLC, PB 2023-011, northwest corner of Veterans Memorial Highway, State Route 454, and whereas Verizon Avenue, Ronkonkoma 3355 Veterans Memorial Highway, and 1734 Verizon Avenue. Applicant requests 2 Planning Board special permits for a fast food restaurant and outside seating accessory to the fast food restaurant in the Industrial Corridor District pursuant to 68-466.1G and L2. Applicant also requests a waiver of the requirement outlined in 68-4661.L, which requires fast food restaurants to be located at a signalized intersection. Site plan modifications are also requested as part of the application. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Appearing on behalf of the applicant, Eugene L. D. Nicola, 200 Railroad Avenue, Sayville, New York. Now, the board heard the applicant's request for 2 special permits and waiver of requirement that the said proposed use be located at a signalized intersection on July 19, 2023. At the conclusion of the hearing, the chairman requested that an applicant prepare a study and analysis of the sites along Vets Highway in the ICD district to confirm the unique status of the subject parcel in that should the board grant a waiver of the ordinance, section 68-466.1L2 for the proposed fast food use for the drive-through, which is not located at a signalized intersection, that such grant will not set a precedent. The applicant's engineer, Polar Engineering, did prepare and present such an application to the planning department on August 16, 2023. The study included the entire ICD zoning district, applying special site criteria attributed to the subject parcel. It concluded that the drive-through could be developed without being located at a signalized intersection, and that the approval of such waiver by this board would not set a precedent. I believe the matter was scheduled for a determination on October 18, 2023, and that was further adjourned to answer the question why a signalized intersection is not required. A memorandum was submitted on October 30, 2023, which I believe has, in fact, responded and answered the question, Mr. Chairman. Covenants and restrictions have been submitted to the applicant from the planning staff, and the applicant is in agreement with those covenants and restrictions. Just one thing which I think Ms. Kelly has clarified, that we prepared a plaza with not only 7 seats, but benches, and those benches, and it's limited to 7 seats, outdoor seating, but the benches have been clarified so that they would not be included in that count. So if someone had a cup of coffee, sit at the bench by the water feature, that would not be considered a seat. I would like to do one further thing, Mr. Chairman, and then I'll be finished. We have letters in support of the application from the adjacent building, which is on the west side of the property. Would the board be, may I hand them up to Ms. Watson?
Thank you. We'll make those part of the record.
And with that, I do have the traffic engineer if the board has any questions. I have the site design engineer if the board has any further questions as well.
Want to go to staff report, then we'll come back and you can answer specific questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since the public hearing, the applicant submitted 2 post-hearing site evaluations detailing how their application won't create a precedent within the ICD corridor for fast food restaurants not located at a signalized intersection. The applicant noted their property is a full block under common ownership that does not have direct access to Vets Highway, and that their traffic study demonstrates the use does not warrant a traffic light. In addition, the applicant updated their site plan to include a public plaza area as outlined in the ICD. As stated previously, the intent of the provision to limit fast food uses to signalized intersections only works to prevent an overabundance of drive-throughs in the corridor, keeping it a true research and industrial corridor, and allow these uses to be located at the safest possible locations for traffic on this highway, which has higher speed limits and traffic volumes. Planning has draft conditions that are in line with other fast food restaurants that have been approved within the ICD, should the board be okay with the waiver.
Thank you. Questions from the board? So let me ask you this, Ms. DiNicola. So you have 2 things you're hinging this on. One is that it's a through lot to 2 different streets. And 2 is that based on your traffic experts' analysis, that a signalized intersection would not be warranted even with this.
That is correct.
With this new use going into play there. That's correct?
That is correct, yes.
And then, Ms. Wozniak, just so I'm, otherwise, everything that's required of this is being met with the exception of?
I think they need a parking relaxation, and then there's some parts of their landscaping on the side streets, I believe, don't meet the width requirement. It's highlighted on their site plan, those right here. But other than that, everything meets the code.
What is the landscaping that's not being met? Do you aware that, Ms. DiNicola, what Ms. Wozniak is talking about?
So it's located, sorry, do you mind if I use this because I don't have it in front of me? I guess it's the depth along Lewis Cassuth Avenue because they're dedicating a portion of the road, and then the same thing along Fiorizon. I think post-dedication, they're only providing 17 foot of depth where 25 is required.
Ms. DiNicola, don't even worry about that. Since you're dedicating part of the road, we won't look at that.
Yes,
It's a merit against you there. Just wanted to clarify that. All right, Mr. Brown?
Yeah, I'd just like to just put on record that going through the application and my original concerns, with setting a precedent for a drive-through, with the criteria that you have here with this piece of property, I'm comfortable and confident that we're not setting any precedent for a drive-through.
I believe that's absolutely correct, Mr. Brown. We have looked at every site in the ICD district on the Veterans Highway, and not one of them is in any way set up as this parcel is, between 2 streets with a deceleration lane on Fiorizon Avenue, right turnout only going with the traffic. So and there's no access onto the Vets Highway, which is a positive from the standpoint of the state of New York.
My building for my business is a block away from this. I've been in this area for 30 years, and this is a good application with a good parcel right there.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
So, Ms. DiNicola, obviously the ITD was put in place, or the restrictions were put there for a reason by the town board. I think you've certainly differentiated why this parcel is different than many others. It may not stop other applicants from purchasing other parcels to meet that and expanding across. I just want to make sure that I'm not going to see you back here asking for another exception in the future, in addition to the 2 that you outlined for me tonight.
Next week.
Honestly, I mean, you're complying with everything else that's required there. I'm not a fan of granting exceptions. I think you've certainly covered why there are, 2 streets that cover the property. I think you've certainly, when we took you off in October and asked you for more information in terms of the signalized intersection, have provided that. I think our traffic consultants were in agreement with what was submitted. So for that reason, you've won me over from saying no this evening to supporting the application.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there anything further from members of the board? Ms. Cruz, anything? Is there a motion? Mr. Brown?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to make a motion to grant the application subject to the CNRs being executed.
Motion by Mr. Brown to grant the application subject to covenants and restrictions. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Moriarty. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, the application is granted. Thank you.
Chairman, members of the board, thank you so very much and have a good evening.
Next item on the agenda, Town Board application, recommendation item, Transform Bohemia New York LLC, CZ 2022-010, north side of Sunrise Highway Service Road, State Route 27, approximately 500 feet west of Johnson Avenue, Sayville, 5147 Sunrise Highway. Applicant requests 2 Town Board special permits for fast food restaurants pursuant to 68-302G and a minor subdivision. Site plan modifications may also be required as part of the application. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is John Stalakis. I'm an associate with Tillman Ballin in Hallpark, New York, and we represent the owner applicant Transform Bohemia New York LLC. With me here this evening is a bit of a crowd. We have James Christensen of Transform Bohemia, Dan Pedersen and Ben Plum of Bowler Engineering, Ethan Chakosky of Atlanta Traffic and Design Engineering, Denise Vista of the Yamato Law Group, counsel for Chick-fil-A, one of the proposed end users, as well as a representative from Chick-fil-A. I know the board is intimately familiar with this project. Since our last meeting on August 16th, we have had extensive discussions with planning staff to resolve the outstanding issues and have done so. I'm happy to go into the specific details of the application and make a full presentation, but I can also defer to the staff report as the board desires.
Why don't we, if you have nothing you want to present, we can go to the staff report and come back and ask questions.
Yes, sure.
Want to do it that way? Mr. Colgan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This application was received a reserved decision at the August 16th hearing due to the buffer relaxation and the request to modify the drive-through queuing covenant. The applicant has agreed to provide a conforming 25-foot buffer to the north where the northern row of parking exists, exclusive of the driveway to Lakeland Avenue. The planning staff is also working with the town attorney's office to formulate a code that will regulate drive-throughs and appropriate means for addressing queuing failures. Both fast food restaurants have agreed to preparing queuing failure plans should their operations adversely impact the operations of the shopping center or in the very unlikely event of obstructing either Sunrise Highway or the adjacent shopping centers. Based on that, the staff recommends that the board grant the application subject to the attached covenants and restrictions.
I just didn't get a chance to look. Does the new site plan show the 25-foot buffer?
It's upside down.
I don't think I got one. That's just the extent.
Okay.
Let me have that back for the other one.
Mr. Chairman, we have not submitted an updated site plan with that buffer on it. We have a diagram prepared here and we could submit that for the board.
As long as you're representing that you're full in agreement that the 25-foot buffer
Yes, correct.
will be in place. That's my only question. Are there further questions from the board? Anything further from the applicant?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a motion? Mr. Brown?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to make a motion to grant the application subject to the planning staff report and the CNRs being signed.
It's a motion by Mr. Brown to grant the application subject to the staff report and the covenants and restrictions. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Matamore. All in favor? Opposed, abstentions, the application is granted.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Steelcast LLC and Marcus ISP Holdings LLC as tenants in common, CZ 2023-014, east side of Carlton Avenue, County Route 17, approximately 1,228 feet north of Courthouse Drive, Central Islip, 300 Carlton Avenue. Applicant requests a change of zone from PDD multifamily to PDD retail services, PDD office, and PDD senior citizen, and from PDD educational campus to PDD retail services, and a modification of covenants and restrictions associated with TC 5363 in order to construct an additional 281 apartments for a total of 645 apartments on site, 81 senior citizen condominiums, a market, 2 medical offices, restaurants, and a retail space. Site plan modifications may be required as part of the application. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. For the applicant, Brian Kennedy, partner with Fortelli Deegan Torana. We are here this evening on our application this board knows very well. The applicant was last before this board on September 20th for a public hearing on Phase 2 of the Belmont at Eastview. As part of that application, the applicant is seeking a change of zone for several portions of the property to construct residential apartments, condominiums, retail space, and medical office. During that public hearing, Both the board and the community provided comment on the proposed plan. The applicant did what they have done throughout this process and listened to the board and listened to the community. They've addressed many of the concerns raised by both the board and the community. They've met almost every recommendation put forward by Mr. Colgan at the public hearing. In response to the feedback provided at the public hearing, the applicant has made several modifications, most notably substantially increasing the land bank parking throughout the site. At Site 1, the property that houses the new NYIT medical facility and proposed marketplace, the applicant reduced the total number of parking stalls at the site and created a plaza between the existing building and the proposed supermarket. They've also relocated the proposed dumpster and loading areas to address the concerns raised by the planning department. At Site 2, landscape islands have been added throughout the parking lot to increase overall landscaping. At Site 3, the medical office building, the applicant now proposes a 3-story building instead of the initially proposed 2-story building. Moving from a 2-story building to a 3-story building has allowed the applicant to eliminate the parking adjacent to the residential use and allowed them to meet the required 50-foot buffer. They've also reduced the total number of parking stalls at the site. Walking paths have been added throughout the site, especially along Carlton Avenue.
Try not to disturb your presentation.
No, that's okay. I just note that on sites 4 and 4A, the residential parcels, the applicant has reduced the total parking, increased the land bank parking, and importantly, they have removed all of the proposed parking adjacent to the Duck Stadium. Mr. Moore has been in contact with Michael Pfaff repeatedly to address all of their concerns. Now, during the public hearing, Mr. Bruno, had raised significant concerns about the proposed architecture. I'd just like to allow Mr. Salar of Combined Resources to just take the board briefly through the revised renderings, if you'd allow.
Looking to speak up so I could flick through the renderings or? Sure. Absolutely. Patricio Solar, that's Patricio Solar, from Combined Resources. Thank you. Good evening. So a quick rundown or presentation of the updated renderings. Going to start on the north side of the property and work our way down if you want to follow on the site plan. So this would be the most northerly building, which is the marketplace. Some of the comments here were last time it was too flat, it didn't fit into the architecture. So what we've done is added a little bit more brick and brought in the gables that tied in back to the existing buildings that are currently on the site. So this is one rendition which would look towards the plaza and towards the New York Tech Medical Building. This would be the view. This would be the view facing Carlton. So as you're driving down Carlton, this is what you would end up seeing. Moving past that, heading south, what we're seeing now is what you're familiar with, which is Robbins Hall. I think you've seen this one prior. Past Robbins Hall, we end up at the renovation of the existing chapel, which is the New York Institute of Technology Medical Building that's going to be on the site. Once we push that through, we end up at what is now 2 long retail lots or buildings that we have. Again, bringing that same architecture to this building that you saw on the market, that you see here, that you see at Robbins Hall, as well as what you see on the current buildings on the site. What you see this here is actually the buildings, the front side of the buildings, which face the parking lot side. And, excuse me. And this is what you would see from the Carlton side. So some more glass, so it doesn't look like the back of a building, even though it is facing Carlton. So we did make some revisions to this elevation. And as Brian was speaking, this is the 3-story new medical arts building, which would anchor the property on the south side. We went up 3 stories, again, bringing back the same detail that you see on the buildings on the site as well. Entrance in the middle with the gables on each end to anchor the building. And I think finally is the residential portion. We were asked to bring in some more brick into what would be the 3-story residential buildings that are scattered throughout. Also keeping in mind that they're not all going to be brick. We're going to choose between 3 different finishes. So it could be brick, it could be a different color in brick, it could maybe be some hardy board. So again, they all don't look exactly the same. Any questions?
I'm just hoping Mr. Bruno's at home watching this because he'd be impressed with the changes you made.
It was all for him.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
did a great job with it.
The only other large issue raised by the board was the issue of affordability at the site. And I have Mr. Moore here just to speak briefly on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At the last meeting, we talked about the affordability. I'd like to provide you with some additional details on the market rate and affordable workforce housing that was discussed at that time. Phase 1 and 2 at the Belmont at Eastview will feature 645 homes as discussed for multifamily apartments, as well as 81 55 or older senior citizen units for sale. This will be inclusive of 10% of affordable housing, which is in compliance with the Plan Development District's requirements. The Belmont will provide for 65 units in the PDD-MF district, a rental opportunity, and 9 units for sale in the PDD-SC 55 or older. The current average market rents are approximately $2,598 per month versus the offered workforce rental rates, which are $2,257 on average per month, a differential of approximately $340 per month. These rental rates are inclusive for both the affordable and the market rate of over $150 in fees, which would normally be paid as extras in most of our competitors' communities. So that's an added benefit that we're offering to both the market and the affordable. When you look at this opportunity, this is really providing workforce housing for people who are at the income levels which are proposed for the 80% of AMI, as well as for the young people who are looking for housing in today's marketplace. Our doors opened in June of 23. Occupancy began in August. We now have over 140 of our apartments rented. The age of our people range from about 25 to 45 in age, and the community really is providing a range of housing types for the younger generation to assist in keeping our workforce here on the island. And that's what we're striving to do here in this project, and we hope to continue it going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
The only other thing that I want to address is the covenants and restrictions. Mr. Colgan and Ms. Dolkenau were incredibly generous with their time today and leading up to today, and we are very, very close to finalizing those terms, and we expect to execute those shortly. I have Courtney Riley of VHB here if the board has any questions regarding the site plan. Otherwise, I'd ask that this board look favorably on our application.
Thank you. Ms. Colgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As stated by the applicant, this application was previously heard on September 20th. The primary concerns raised at that time were affordability, traffic, and architecture. The applicant has indicated that the affordable rates required by town code are close to market rates. The subject application, as did the prior one, complies with the Plan Development District's requirement of 10% overall, which applies to both the rental and the ownership component. The traffic study was reviewed by the town's traffic consultant and indicated that the traffic generated by the proposed project can be accommodated on the highway network. In addition, the town's Department of Public Works will be addressing the Eastview Drive traffic issues and utilizing some of the mitigation fees amassed by all of the development within the CIPDD. And as you've seen, the latest architectural elevations address the context of the existing buildings and bear more of a relationship to the original community. Walking paths have also been added to the front yards of the retail spaces to add to the ambiance and vibrance of Carlton Avenue. Lastly, Site 3, which is the medical office building, may require landscape relaxation and subsequently a mitigation fee. The staff is working with the applicant on mitigating the extent of the landscape relaxation and supports allowing the fee to be determined by the planning commissioner in consideration of land banking and providing extra shade trees. Based on all this, the staff recommends that the board grant the application subject to finalizing the attached covenants and restrictions.
Thank you. Questions from the board? Anything further from the applicant?
No, thank you.
And thank you for working through those issues that were raised at the last planning board. I know couldn't accomplish all of them, but you did a great job in getting as many accomplished as possible.
And that's a testament to the planning staff working in close conjunction with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Colgan. Moriarty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would make a motion to grant the application subject to the attached conditions and restrictions, or covenants and restrictions, sorry.
I'm just going to modify that to say there's a motion to grant the application subject to the covenants and restrictions being agreed to between planning staff and the applicant. That's correct. Is there a second to that? Second by Mr. Ruggieri, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, the application is granted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
If you want this back.
We've done before.
Next item on the agenda is Town Board application public hearing, Tully Environmental, Inc., DBA Clearbrook by David Galbraith, CZ 2023-017, north side of Green Street, 15 Green Street, and south side of Essex Street, 30 Essex Street, through lot to Denver Avenue, Bay Shore. Applicant requests a change of zone from Industrial 1 District to Industrial 2 District, the modification of covenants and restrictions associated with TC 4468, and a planning board special permit for a transfer station pursuant to 68-356.1A. Site plan modifications may be required as part of the application. Good evening.
The applicant, David Gilmartin Jr., Greenberg Trorg, 900 Stewart Avenue, Garden City, New York. At our last hearing, Mr. Chairman, we were asked to go back and see if we could mitigate some of the odor issues that the neighbors raised during the hearing. And we were able to come back with two different efforts to do that. First, we agreed to enhance the current odor control on site. I believe that that's been provided to the planning staff. And then secondly, the owner agreed to install zip doors, which close very quickly on the existing building that where the waste is treated. So we believe between those two mitigation measures that we'll be able to reduce the odor. I have David Galbraith of Tully here who can further explain those, but they have been provided to the planning staff.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Mr. Colgan for a report, and then we'll come back for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This application was heard at the October 18th hearing. The primary concern raised at that time were the odors emanating from the existing facility. The applicant has agreed to upgrade the filtration system and install zip doors to help better contain the odors within the building. Fire Marshal's office indicated that these would exceed the minimum requirements and supports the concept. Based on that, the staff would recommend that the board grant the application subject to the attached conditions, covenants, restrictions.
Questions from the board? Anything further from the applicant? Is there a motion? I would just say for the record, I do not support the application. I won't be voting for it this evening, but that's really, I just think because of the environmental impacts on some of the neighboring properties is one of the things I look at when granting a special permit. And based on the comments I made at the last hearing, plus my visit to the area, I think there are environmental impacts on the neighboring properties, but that's just myself. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Brown.
I'm going to make a motion to grant the application subject to the CNRs being executed.
It's a motion by Mr. Brown to grant the application subject to the CNRs. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Matamore. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Myself, abstentions. And I'll note for the record that Mr. Frugieri stepped away. The application is granted. Thank you. I want to recall item number 8 on the agenda, which is Fifth Avenue XNY LLC, PB 2023. And Ms. Wozniak, you want to?
Is the Menino application?
No, no, this is the Fifth Avenue XNY. We have to declare lead agency. Whatever you want.
Town is declaring lead agency for the 1612 XNY application tonight.
So.
Because it's a
planning board
type 1
has declared
action.
itself as
Yes.
lead agency on this. We need to vote on that, do we? Okay, so is there a motion to accept what this, we need to,
Which number is this?
this is item number 8. We need a lead agency since it's type 1 action. We're saying the planning board is in fact lead agency.
I'd make a motion to accept Mrs. Wozniak's statement.
Thank you. Motion by Mr. Brown to accept Ms. Wozniak's statement as the planning board being the lead agency, second by Ms. Moriarty. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions? We are declared as the lead agency on that. Going back to Menino's, which was number 7, is the applicant here, not seeing the applicant. We want to adjourn that application again. Motion by Mr. Moriarty to adjourn that application, second by Ms. Cruz. All in favor? Opposed, abstentions? We are adjourned.
Do they have to be there for this?
If we have questions of them, certainly.
We did. Yeah, all right.
And I have questions on that application regarding the valet parking part of it, which I think was raised by some of the community members, them hitting the alarm keys, and it's the only thing they haven't addressed, so I would like an answer from them as to why they can't do that. It'd be nice for them to come and present. Is there a motion? Mr. Madam, one motion to adjourn, second by everybody on this side. All in favor, opposed, abstentions, we're adjourned. Thank you.
All right.